Ahmer, welcome to Stories in AI. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you,
I'm
Ganesh?
doing fantastic. Thanks for taking the time. Why don't we jump right in and start with your story, your personal story, your life, and you're like this amazingly accomplished professional in artificial intelligence. Tell us how it all started and your journey.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. My journey kind of chronologically started out in India in my undergraduate program. I was studying mechanical engineering, and the domain of kind of the cognitive sciences was just picking up, and NASA has just landed the Mars rover, and there's a lot of global excitement overall about what is possible, like where the humanity is going. So while working on the machines and thinking about cognitive systems and expert systems were the things back then, kind of really got sucked into moving from like the physical machines to how can we replicate human cognitive thinking and integrate that into the machine. So almost like the vision of the cybernetics. So kind of where I got my kind of the addiction, I might say, to the domain of AI, and I have remained in that space and pushed myself into that space through and through. I went to graduate school, Texas A&M, got in depth into the statistical sciences.
So I'm sorry to
theories,
hear about
operations
A&M, by the way, but
you are a longhorn. I see how it is. But yeah, I mean, I've been in this space, data and analytics, machine learning, AI, and as things have evolved, fascinating thing to me is almost like a homecoming. I was working on neural networks and propagation models like 20 plus years ago, and with the way things have evolved from a technology perspective, we can do those things much better, much faster, and exciting to be kind of back into the realm of AI. Most recently, my journey has taken me to kind of Wells Fargo, PwC, a couple of other stints in between. Nike, I was most recently Chief AI Officer at Pactera Edge, and continuing to move my journey forward in this domain of AI. Yeah. And in addition to this, I'm also on the brain trust of XPRIZE. We design these competitions to help propel innovation that will serve the humanity forward, and also on the task force with the Responsible AI Institute and WEF in helping design the world's first responsible AI certification program. So a lot to kind of
So Ahmer, fascinating background, right? And it's just so fascinating to see how you actually had this common thread around AI and data and analytics throughout your career, and culminated to a couple of these chief AI officer roles and working with some, the World Economic Forum, the XPRIZE Foundation, and so forth. So you've seen a lot. You've seen the evolution of the market too. Where is AI today in the world? What's happening, and what is working, what is not, and why?
That's a great question. What I see, that the beauty that of it all is that, and I say beauty because I do think it's kind of fascinating as a phenomenon, is the paradox of the promise. So the promise of AI is pervasively accepted and understood. Studies after studies showing everyone from WEF to all management consulting companies, everyone saying like AI is here and AI is the future, right? But the paradox is that the adoption is really, really low. Like some studies are out there saying 85 to 90% of the AI or the data initiatives fail the adoption test, the last mile. Why do they fail it? They fail it because of lack of relevancy and context. They fail because experiments do not scale up and generalize. They fail because they fail to connect the dot between the true needs of the end users, the people who are going to be impacted, versus what's being built. A lot of solutions looking for problems, right? If we build it, they will come. It just doesn't work in the AI space, right? Maybe in a movie. So that's the paradox, right? And when we think about it, which I think World Economic Forum is even calling it out when they ask about what is the impediment. Number one of the top impediments to driving the fourth industrial revolution. And they are rightfully calling out is that the lack of readiness of the leadership. So the leadership that is in the positions to drive this revolution don't understand and know AI well, right? And even a lot of companies, when they do hire chief data officer, chief analytics officer, they are generally second or the third level roles. They don't really have a lot of say or power in influencing at the board level, right? And so there's a lack of understanding, lack of preparation and readiness. On top of it is the mindset. A lot of the leadership is still in this govern and maintain mode. Let's not rock the boat. There's no incentive to rock the boat. There's no incentive to drive change. So there's a lack of readiness. So what that leads to is this experimentation approach to like, hey, everyone is saying we should do it. Our competition is doing it. Let's just do something with it, right? And those experiments may show some value in the short term within the experiment phase, but by the time it comes to like truly scale it up into an enterprise solution with the capabilities, a lot of them just fail for various reasons. There is a cultural aspect, there is change management aspect, and there's also definitely a technical aspect to it all. And on top of it, there is this thing that AI solutioning gets treated like software engineering. You have a discrete problem to solve, you write out your specs, and you write code to it, and voila, you have a solution. AI, at the core of it, is science. It's a scientific process. It's a learning process. Science. It's an experimentation process. So the way AI systems and solutions should be built is a little bit different. It should be built like us humans learn, right? And then we don't allow that approach of like how kids learn as they grow, which is try something, fail at it, keep trying it, learn a skill, get better, right? And then move on. We don't build AI solutions like that. So all in all, I think is the how we build it, how we position it, how we scale it, how we connect the dots. It all needs to evolve, which is kind of where I co-created this framework called Mindful AI, which hopefully kind of helps solve some of these challenges that I'm speaking to.
Yeah, that's actually awesome. Before we go into Mindful AI, I want to double click a little bit more on this problem statement that you mentioned, right? First off, I think it's very eloquently put, right, in terms of like the challenges of the promise of AI. I call it the promise of AI is yet remaining unfulfilled, right? Everybody believes in the promise. Everybody knows it's actually game changing and will have a lot of potential and has a lot of potential. But operationalizing it to realize that value has been lacking in the market. Completely agree. You mentioned that's because of three things, right? One is the context and relevancy. The second is the inability to scale up these systems or scale out these capabilities. And then last is the failure to adoption or not connecting the dots with the needs of the end user, right? Let's pick each one of them, if you don't mind, just a little bit, right? Context and relevancy. Are we talking about the fact that you're not really connecting the business value to the experiments you're trying to drive, or is it just the fact that is it just a lack of context because people haven't solved these kind of problems before? Explore that a little bit for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of both, right? And it really, to me, the context and relevancy comes down to what is it that the end user wants out of it, right? What is the core, or what is the pain point that you're trying to address? Why would they want something, an intelligent solution to augment, or whatever that may be? So case in point could be, and again, like I'm talking AI in terms of the enterprise solutioning, and then of course not so much on the driverless vehicles and all that. And there's an aspect there too. And then what is it that we want? Like, why overcomplicate things kind of, but there's an whole aspect of that too. But yeah, to me, it's the lack of context and relevancy comes out into multiple aspects of it. Who is this being solution designed for? And then for what purpose? And a lot of the time we don't ask that question and we don't answer that question. So that leads to challenges and issues. For example, there's an aspect of where do a lot of the AI solutions fail? The last mile, right? One bad experience can lead to people that's just not using the systems anymore. As an example, if you built a voice AI system that is not trained to understand various accents, and you try to use that in your own accent or my own accent 3-4 times, it doesn't work. I'm not going to go back to it. So it lacks that relevancy to me, right, in that case. And that is a terminology when I was at Pactera Edge, we called AI localization. So localizing it to individual experiences connecting it to the local cultural and linguistics nuances, right? A solution that is context can be, if you're training and building an AI application, for example, in healthcare to help identify and diagnose a problem, let's say using X-rays. Did we have the right balanced sets of data to ensure that it was designed for generalization, or is it that the data was so out of balance that it doesn't work for certain sets of population? Recently, Google launched a skin cancer diagnostics capability, and of course, when digging in, it turned out that for darker skin tones, it actually doesn't work. So that is context, that is relevancy, right? In enterprise sense, have you justified why this particular solution is needed? Let's say supply chain. I mean, if you have a problem on a particular KPI, for example, on-time delivery, can AI solve it or not? Like, should AI solve it or not? Like, so it's kind of like the connecting to KPI versus the human needs and emotions. So to me, context and relevancy has those two. And then needs and emotions are also very relevant to enterprise solutions as well. Our expectations for how we interact with digital platforms is right now influenced by best-in-class applications, physical and digital. And if we don't get that similar experience with our enterprise solutions, it's a bad experience. People say, oh, I hate opening this application. Like, if we talk about the emotions, oh, it makes me just anxious just thinking about going into this application, right? So those are feelings, and true feelings. So we have to design it, right, these applications for that lovability of the experience. So all of those kind of combined together, to me, are part of the context and relevancy question.
No, I know. Look, so it's interesting. The notion of user experiences and designing experiences to how you interact, how users interact with intelligent agents is an emerging field. It's a very, very critical field because the whole act is about how do you extend human intelligence to non-living things. Yep. And that requires you to, do you treat them as living objects? Do you treat them as non-living things that has got intelligence? Yeah. There's all these little nuances that, as you said, the emotions, the trust factor, the feelings, all of those things come into play in the way you interact with the particular things. And I know it's broadly for all digital and physical experiences, but AI specifically highlights that problem.
The reason for that is because we are asking people to trust an entity that is not us to be an augmentation of our intelligence. And another part of it, and why a lot of the AI solutions kind of fail, is that there's a task orientation to designing solutions. Look at what people do, what processes are, what steps are, and let's try to bring some automation into it, right, with AI and stuff like that, right? So that's the task orientation. You're solving it for today's need. Yep. What if we, instead of solving it for what we do, but instead we ask, why do we do what we do? Then you're changing it from a task orientation to a purpose orientation. So when we bring in a purpose orientation, then you're designing it for future. So case in point, right? I'll give you an example. So enterprise solutions. If we go and ask planners, they say I love Excel. We do all this work in Excel. Let's just say that. Or Excel-like tabular kind of a web application that mimics and replicates the look and feel of Excel, but it's not really Excel, but still same way of operations, right? And after you do all your design sessions with the end user, multiple iterations after iteration, if your prototypes still end up being Excel-like, then you have to ask the question, then why do we need to redesign? Just use Excel. I mean, it's a fine tool with Power BI and all that stuff, why do we need to do that? But then if you ask about what about this type of experience is it that is enticing to you, right? And if you start to peel it, right, again, it's a concept kind of like empathy and microdoses kind of a thing, and it starts to come out like, oh, I want to feel empowered because this experience allows me to bring my own tribal knowledge, experience, and expertise. It allows me to play with the data, run scenarios. So so it's not that the Excel you love, it's the aspect of feeling a sense of empowerment and in being able to utilize your own experience to interact with the data and truly augment your intelligence. So what if we then design it for that? Like if you don't ask that question, then it wouldn't happen.
No, it's fascinating. Also, for the record, you're the first person who ever, praised the Excel experience in the show. So, but hey,
the
my
world runs on
CPA
Excel.
would agree with you. But I totally get it. The world runs on Excel for sure.
Yeah.
No, I use a lot of Excel too. So the other aspect that you called out is the leadership, the World Economic Forum's work, and it's interesting you say that, right? CDOs average tenures a year and a half. The empowerment of them is done almost like a Me Too governance standpoint, saying, I'm just going to do it because it's just the in thing to do, rather than truly empowering them to go drive transformation. And I think, and you mentioned this, and it's the lack of understanding or having the context of what this really means, right? Everybody fakes their understanding of what AI could do to their business, but not a really clear understanding of what's the opportunity cost of not doing this, right? I used to say, for AI is an opportunity for any business to, drive exponentially forward, right, against their competition, or be geometrically left behind because it's not gonna, it compounds. It's a compounding science, right? Where you start early, you're gonna learn, you're gonna iterate, you're gonna get better at it. So one thing I always wonder is this whole CDOs and, where does AI belong? Is it chief AI officer? Is it a chief data officer? Is there a CIO? Is it part of the CTO? Is it part of product organizations? You mentioned board level, board visible kind of roles and stuff. Is that really going to solve it? I mean, it's just more empowerment? Because end of the day, I think the way you mentioned, right, not having a very true understanding of what this can do to the business, then treating it like a product organization or P&L to go drive that thing. I don't think unless you do that, no amount of massaging and elevating the role is going to help us, right?
No, it's just not going to do that. And it has to tie to the core of the business. Like some of the, my advice, typically, again, it's just single data point for my own experiences, has been align. If you want to be successful with AI in an enterprise, align to the core of the business first and foremost. If you have to prove the value there, and then what do I mean by the core of the power center of a business, right? It depends. So in certain companies, chief marketing officer is the power center. In other companies, chief operating officer or it's COO or CFO might be. It depends on the type of the company. So if we say supply chain distribution-led products company, it's COO is where you need to drive the alignment. If it's a digital experience, so CMO is where you have to align. Though that's the core of the business, number one. Number two, connecting the dots to what is it that they are promising? What is it that they are on hook to deliver? Because they have been given a charter that has been approved by the board. Like the part of that is tying to the core of the business, right? What's going to be done? Because everyone is talking about digital transformation. Like you can't not talk about it because you'll be left behind. So everyone has this charter. So the question is then tying to it, aligning with it, and influencing it. You don't have to be, in many cases, be in the boardroom as long as you're part of at least the conversation to help the person who is responsible for driving that change succeed, right? The other thing that I've seen is that leads to a lot of failure is when the new CDO, the CAOs come in and then they start with a technical orientation, not a business orientation. I'm going to come in and put a 3-year data transformation strategy in place. Who has the patience for that? Of course, it needs to happen, but you can't wait 3 years to drive value, looking at the average tenure of CDOs being a year and a half. The other part of it is if your role is primarily ingesting data, housing data, storing data, governing it, and cleaning it, when are you going to drive the value? That's not driving the value. Driving the value comes from monetizing the data. The other part of the technical orientation I've seen is that a lot of the time effort gets focused more on hiring all the PhDs and this and that, bringing all this tool kit and everything, and in many cases, kind of putting the cart kind of before the horse kind of situation. And my advice typically has been like as a new CDO or CAO coming in enterprise, align as closely as possible with the business. Have the CIO, CTO as your partner in crime, not an enemy. And a lot of places it does happen. politics gets in the way, and then enterprises, right? So it's more of a consensus building and improving the value, tying it to the big core of the business. Understanding, and then it's a kind of a three-pronged approach there, or a three-layer cake, kind of, if I may say it. It's the chief data officer is a transformation agent. A lot of companies make the mistake of bringing people who have just done the technical part of it. And then they put them in front of the business, and they do not have the business context and relevance to be able to connect and the tie in. You're a change agent. It's a different type of persona. You have to be able to cut across the entire organization and build consensus and partnership. So it's a different framework. Then the next bottom layer is where grassroots, like creating the demand at the bottom level. So product owners bring and I'm a big fan of product-centric approach. Bring product owners, starts to create COEs, start to create forums to where end users, if it's a company that has like thousands of planners, it starts to interact with the planners, connect the dots between your data scientists and data engineers with the planners so that they understand what's going on, because that's where all the data gaps assessment is going to come from, right? Like, and then the pain points and all that. But then comes your middle layer. So you're building consensus at the advocacy at the top. You're creating almost like a grassroots movement to generate the demand from the bottom up. Then your middle layer, which is where all the good ideas go to die. That's where the PO role and the CDO role a little bit becomes very important, is to find your potential promoters, persuadables, and detractors, right? So carve out, put aside the detractors, focus on the promoters, take the imperative from the top, partner with the promoters, and then accelerate. And then if you've already done the grassroots component of generating the demand from bottom up, then you already have a list of pain points you can go after that tie directly to the top line KPIs. Then the success-based, impact-based storytelling becomes easier. And storytelling is extremely, extremely crucial, right?
Yep.
But the thing is, it takes time and efforts to do it that way. And what I've seen is many organizations don't give the new CDOs or CAOs enough time, essentially, to actually be able to be transformation agent. And then that's where they start to kind of go back into try and test it, experiment with a few things, try to stick some landings, and then at that time it's already a losing battle.
That's fascinating. Really good perspective, Ahmer. And I think I have probably a slightly contrarian view of what we should be doing, right? And I'll tell you why. Most organizations, if you think about it, who have gotten and embarked into AI, realized a few things. Number one, there's all these experiments happening in all these places. We got to commonize it. We got to bring a governance structure in mind and bring it all together. So they all embarked on this centralized COE model, right? Everybody has a COE for AI, right? You hire a bunch of technical experts. You may hire some product managers. Side note, product management in the age of AI and data product managers are a very, very crucial role. Storytelling, the ability to look at all these multiple moving parts of data, algorithm, user experience, the whole nine yards, right? So that's side note.
Yeah.
Definitely, I totally agree with you on that. So, but we all brought in and everybody said centralized AI COEs. And I've personally been involved in probably 20 different COE build-outs for my clients, folks that I've worked with. Yeah. And all of them get the initial surge of value, and then the great ideas go to die, right? So then it becomes another really dodgy, slow organization that becomes another bureaucracy like your central IT, right? And so my view is, my proposal is, and there's a few of my clients, consulting clients that I work with, they're experimenting with this, is split create the separation of concerns in AI, right? In the entire framework. Number one, have the centralized team worry about setting the right infrastructure, right? Be it the machine learning platform, be it the data, the quality of the data, all those kind of things. Typically, traditional IT-ish kind of roles and functions where the goal is governance, ensuring availability, just classic. You're a centralized organization that's going to make sure that everybody has what they need. Because the centralized COEs often don't have the business domain expertise. They're already cut off from the business to do it. So create a second layer function, the value engineering with AI, using this infrastructure should be done at the business units themselves. And it's very controversial because I tell this to people, and every single one of the CDOs are trying to just make sure you take that headcount from the business unit and put it into a central organization. I think it's a complete mistake.
Yeah. No, I agree with, and actually I'll give you a recent example. I think and it depends on the type of enterprises too, right? Certain cases, centralization can work, and especially more, I would say, digital native enterprises that understand the technology, power of technology, they can move faster, right? They're not fighting with this old guard in a way. And then the digital non-natives, that's what we're talking about, essentially. The companies that are on the cusp of, that's where the potential is for transformation. I completely agree with you. And I think in a lot of those cases, what our consulting has been similar approach. And the idea is a shared sense of responsibility for driving transformation together. Sure. Not putting like this, the CIO who's going to do the transformation is not my job. No, it's everyone's job. And in some of those scenarios, we've created like a joint council, like an AI council. And an AI council has members from business, finance, technology, data. So basically, all of the and then the experience kind of a thing. So all of the entities that need to come together to build something, right? So then you're and the other part of this is unless you change the incentives, and then unfortunately, a lot of the time that has to be the driver, and the incentive plans have to evolve. And then many times the advice has been that they add the incentives for propelling AI, add the incentive for using AI, and add the incentive to make AI successful. So that's again part of it, right? And embedding the people in the organizations where the work is happening is extremely crucial because you have to live and breathe it. Is part of it. So yeah, I mean, again, it's based on the types of organization. It's sure. The whole concept is loosely coupled, tightly aligned.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that I believe this current evolution of AI in the industry, in the market, has a couple of nuances, right? This is like deep learning was invented less than 10 years ago, less than 5 years ago, right? And, or at least discovered. But, if you look at, when you started with AI, with expert systems and symbolic logic and stuff, the whole idea was capturing human knowledge, codified into a system so it can do things like humans do.
Yep.
Well, we've swung the pendulum on this side and say all we care about is data-driven machine learning, which is great that you have a lot of data that you can learn from and stuff. But then you miss out the most, like the common sense is missing in today's AI because of that reason, right? Because you're dependent on the data. And I think, back to this notion of business units and organizations have leaders and individuals, people at the edges who have the business knowledge. And if you can capture that, harness that knowledge and train the systems as well, they can be a better co-pilot for the same users, right? So it's an interesting...
No, I agree with you. And actually, that's part of the mindful AI design, framework design, is to co-create and work with the end users before even a single line of code is written. Basically, establishing the what and the why and the outcomes out the gate, like upfront, is extremely crucial. And it's an iterative process, but yeah.
Tell me more about mindful AI. What is that framework and how did it come about?
Yeah, so it primarily comes from the experience of like seeing a lot of the systems and technology. It's like, especially in the AI space, kind of experiments kind of failing or initial successes not scaling up. And then the whole notion kind of comes from that, is that what is really truly missing a lot of the time is the what and the why. And then the change management aspect of it, which is who we are building it for and then for what purpose and what are their pain points that need to be addressed. And a lot of the time those tend to become afterthoughts. So the whole notion here is how can we integrate an empathy-led design thinking framework and embed that with rapid prototyping design thinking framework, and then add in the overall MLOps construct with it, so that we can hone in on what and the why, to leading with the purpose and the intention of the system that we're building, right? And the artificial intelligence experience that we're designing, essentially, so that it kind of hones into the intent and the purpose, rapid prototyping, experimenting, validation, landing that lovability of the experience. As you're landing the lovability of the experience, then you can start to kind of bring in the best-in-class AI engineering to start to scale up while continuing to co-create and work with the end users. And in that way, what happens is that the end users, from a change management perspective, become your best advocate, evangelist. So it helps actually solve the change management problem to where a lot of places again experience, even in the AI and the data and machine learning, when talk to enterprises, a lot of commonly you hear, oh, it's just another IT thing, another IT project. They're just building something to make our life difficult. So it changes that whole us versus them mentality to a shared sense of common purpose, working together. And in that frame, in fact, the rollout and the change management aspect actually done and led by the people that you're building with. So they're part of the community that's going to use it. It's designed for them and with them. Upfront, actually, there's a lot of design thinking exercises that go into it around when I talked about purpose-driven design versus task-oriented design, aspects about emotions and the feelings. So understanding true like emotions and the feelings and what type of emotions and the feelings you want to have. And I know it kind of sounds a little bit hokey, but it's actually extremely crucial in the digital experience design perspective. And then those aspects actually may seem on the surface and some engineers might scoff at it. But whenever we brought engineers into this dialogue, which is crucial for them to be part of it, they realize that that actually helps them narrowly focus the requirements for what type of technology to use, what are the SLAs going to be for the what type of frameworks for modeling they have to use, because the users are telling us how they want to use this system. So it becomes it becomes that iterative process to where the builders and the users are part of the same ecosystem.
Yeah, it's more contextual. They can it's actually usable. They can fill the missing part because they understand the overall context, right? Yeah. It's awesome. I love it. Do mindful AI to get lovable AI. Yes. I love that, actually.
Exactly.
And the other thing that you actually interestingly called out was the whole notion of a co-creation process, right? So you have to figure out how do you co-create a data product, because it's iterative in nature, whether it's a machine learning system or just a data product. It really kind of brings out, you're solving the last mile adoption problem because they're becoming a part of the solution themselves, right? And defining and encountering the problem. Which leads me to the other side of the discussion. And you wrote an article recently on the metaverse, right? On like the metaverse requires mindful AI, right? So explore that for me, because I think conceptually, I mean, there's a lot of buzz around the metaverse. And some people argue that it's just another way to actually bring in all the mixed reality, alternate reality into the fold. But I think I forget who said that, but metaverse is not so much a thing. It's a time element, right? Wherein when you end up spending more time in the digital world than you do in the physical world, it changes a lot of things. Yeah. And that's why in that context, it's very relevant. But, talk about that. Why does the metaverse require mindful AI?
Thank you for asking that question. I think it really comes down to, again, the intent and the purpose. What is the metaverse being designed for? To what end? What is supposed to serve? We have seen the impacts of social media, positive and negative, and of course, negative is very well documented and commonly talked about the impact on the social life and everything across the globe. The danger of building a purposeless technology is that it only then designed to serve the objectives of those who are creating it. And in certain cases, we have seen that their objectives sometimes do not truly align with the societal objectives. And in that case, then it becomes the risk of designing a metaverse which changes the overall aspect of how we experience technology today, and including AR, VR, which is still primarily a spectator-focused experience. Metaverse actually completely changes that to an egocentric experience. you are fully immersed into it, like it's designed with you, for you, right? And a lack of purposefulness, in my opinion, can create potential much larger societal problems. The other thing is, like in a metaverse, everything we do, every micro, every micro interaction is tracked and is modeled, and then it's designed to then guide your experience there, that is built to built to for the entity that's designed it to benefit them. It's not to benefit the individual or the society. So that's kind of where the mindfulness element comes into me. So from my perspective, the other part is it's a borderless digital world. So all of these data privacy regulations, consumer protections, individual bills of rights and everything, they kind of go out the door. And there are, and the right level of regulations are, in my opinion, important for certain aspects, because there are like biases and things, like, rightfully so. Who's going to be governing metaverse that is completely borderless? Who owns the stewardship of the people, of the society? Who owns the stewardship of at the most basic level, the data itself? Whose data? And so that becomes an aspect to it. So for me, I do see on the other side of it, despite all the risks, that I do see that a metaverse, quote unquote, outside of the hype and the buzzword, can propel the next space age or space program for us. So thinking about what the space program did in the 1960s and the type of innovation that has come out of it, that has benefited society at large, besides the rockets, like its internet, like everything, so much technology came out of it. So for a metaverse to be relevant and for that experience to be relevant and fully immersive, we have to solve the problem of data. We have to solve, and in this case, data, I'm talking about synthetic data, because you're creating a synthetic versions of the universe, right? And then those synthetic universes being integral to our experience and how we want to experience that. So innovations in that, innovation in cloud technology and infrastructure, because you cannot have a metaverse experience that is not as real time as our real physical experiences are. So that means the type of the content delivery technology that has to be invented and innovated, the edge computing essentially, is tremendous. Algorithms, being able to learn with micro levels of data, smaller and smaller sets of data, learn in real time and deliver an inference that is meaningful for that experience. So imagine the innovation that has to go into place. And then the fourth element of innovation is the experience itself. A lot of the AR, VR still looks pretty fake. Like, what would make metaverse successful, right? So that innovation. And then I think the innovation that is going to come out in it is going to have more outlasting power than the current hype around the metaverse itself. And I think the metaverse, in a way, gaming and entertainment and all that I can see. I can also see these technologies now coming together to create new metaverse applications that are purposeful and meaningful and mindful. For example, in medical sciences, we can use now metaverse-based environments to train nurses. For example, nurses who are working on community engagement programs or community health program, we can train them on lived experiences of the people that they're going to connect with. So they have a shared sense of empathy for the people that they're going to work with. You can create those experimental scenarios within a metaverse to train people, because training in a physical world is going to be extremely challenging and difficult and expensive. And because with the metaverse, you can create these varieties on the fly, like these personas, and then train. And Johns Hopkins recently already did experimental surgery using some metaverse technology. So I do think that the technology has a lot of purpose and potential purpose behind it, if applied mindfully. So that's kind of my long spiel there about it.
No, it's pretty awesome, and I think you're spot on, right? This is buzzwords aside, and how it's captured the imagination of a lot of people, and it's not a new concept. It's the whole idea that we've been our heads inside Facebook for the last 20 to 15 years, right? 10 years, whatever. So this just is the next evolution of the social interaction digital platforms that we have, where you add more immersion into the whole thing, but it opens up, as you said, an exponential set of possibilities that we can do. I love the way you phrased it. This could be the next space age, the 1960s space rush that we did, that we saw. This could unlock a lot of innovations. That said, I think one of the things I thought of, and like when you have all these different metaverses, it's going to be like I want to build a company, and I just made a note of that. I'm going to find someone to go do this. We're going to build an inter-metaversal travel company that allows people to move from one metaverse to the other, maintain their personas, and map it to the new personas. It's a hard data problem if you think about it. Right? So I have that on my list of.
No, and I think you nailed it, because I think one of the biggest challenge the metaverse is going to face is the interoperability per se. I may even use that terminology here, but interoperability is what's going to make it successful and impactful. Without a sense of interoperability, they'll just become another AR, VR, which is still vying for its relevance.
Exactly. And the notion of interoperability itself is different, because it's going to be experience driven.
It is, exactly.
It's less about, hey, I have the same formats to actually store the data, or I'm using the same descriptors. I mean, it doesn't matter. It has to be the seamless experiences when you're actually doing it, right? So I think there's an opportunity. We should, if you're interested, we should catch up after. In the interest of time, I have one last question for you, and then we can wrap up. One is, like you've been, and we talked about exponential technologies, so XPRIZE. You've been actually part of the XPRIZE brain trust, and you've been doing that. And there's a lot of things that changed over the last 2 years with COVID, right? Yeah. What have you seen as an evolution, like a lot more focus on climate, for example, than it was 2 years ago? How has that landscape, from your vantage point at XPRIZE, how have you seen innovation and the pace of innovation for deep humanity-related issues evolve over the last 2 years?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that we have observed is with the pandemic, when it forced people back into their homes. And I was just talking with a colleague of mine recently, is that I feel like it has brought a sense of humanity and purpose back into work. When it pushed us back into thinking about like connecting with our families and spending more time there, and thinking about this fear that is out there, and that we are all in it collectively together, and we cannot go back to it again. We have to be better prepared next time, right? So what I'm sensing is there's a lot of purpose-driven innovation that's beginning to come out of it. We have seen, of course, the mass resignation that continues to be there, and a lot of it is driven by opportunities. Many people are starting, and with XPRIZE, and the brain trust there, what we're also seeing is that many innovators do want to work on things that are going to solve our next problem. And in a way, the orientation is thinking about what types of problems as a planet and a society we are likely to see in the next 10 to 20 years, what impediments exist towards solving those right over time, and then can we remove those impediments today and start to solve for those today. So case in point, what if we could, and again, the whole borderless notion, right, and of the pandemics, viruses don't know borders, those are political constructs. So what I'm seeing is that more and more global collaboration, people more coming together. And what I love about what XPRIZE has done is that they have given people at least specific problems. Here's a problem. Go form a team, and we'll support you. And let's see if we can push something forward. So there are teams coming together from, like parts of Africa and in Asia and in Europe and then in the US, and then coming together and then work together. Some of the things that innovations that are coming out from that is around, for example, climate change. How do we reduce the carbon that's going into the air? Can we capture it? So it's pushing and it truly like what if we could type of a framework versus purely thinking about like, oh, let's just immediate problem today and I'm going to just solve it and make some quick bucks and move on. But it's really more of a purpose-driven innovation. On the healthcare side of the thing, all the questions about access to health, equity in health. And this is the major problem, equity in health. And how do we solve it? And then how do we solve it thinking holistically, not just from a technology, but, the beyond. Exciting times ahead for sure. Yeah.
No, it's pretty amazing. And, like to your point, what this last 2 years really did was back to our earlier conversation about the metaverse. It pushed our heads inside the computer already, right? So it's going to be just a natural evolution if you make it more mindful, more purposeful, and then you focus on the outcomes that you want to drive for humanity at large, right?
Yeah.
Ahmer, this was fascinating. I know we ran a little over time at what we planned. I have one quick personal question to you. What's one personal practice that you employ? I kind of have a guess what it is, but then what do you do? What's your power practice?
My power practice really is mindfulness. So that was an easy guess for you.
Sure. That was a tough guess for me, by the way.
Yeah. And in fact, I like how the practice of mindfulness is becoming more and more understood and then practiced with, so many applications out there. And with strong proponents, even like Satya Nadella, who openly talks about it. So it's good to see a sense of purpose and mindfulness coming back into our work environment. It gives us a sense of grounding for why we are doing what we are doing.
Absolutely. Ahmer, this was fascinating. How can the viewers and listeners get in touch with you?
I think the LinkedIn is the easiest way to.
Best way to do it? Yeah. Very good. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was a blast.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation and thank you for having me.